When banks failed and food lines stretched for blocks during the Great Depression, one community stood apart: the Amish. While millions of Americans went hungry, Amish families maintained food security through ancient practices most modern Americans have completely forgotten. These weren't trendy diet tips, they were survival methods passed down through generations that suddenly became crucial when the modern food system collapsed. Their simple, self-sufficient approach to feeding families without electricity, refrigeration, or grocery stores held secrets that would ultimately help countless non-Amish neighbors survive America's darkest economic chapter. Let's uncover these forgotten Amish food practices that could feed families even when money disappeared. Scrapple, the original no-waste protein. When the Great Depression hit, countless Americans suddenly couldn't afford meat, but Amish communities had been practicing a remarkable protein-stretching technique for generations. Their humble scrapple turned parts most Americans discarded into sustaining breakfast protein that could feed large families for days on minimal ingredients. Unlike today's meat consumption that focuses on prime cuts, Amish families utilized every part of butchered animals, especially the odd bits. After butchering, they would carefully save hearts, livers, and scraps of meat too small for other purposes, then simmer them with bones to extract every bit of nutrition. This rich broth and meat mixture was then thickened with cornmeal and buckwheat flour until it formed a solid loaf that could be sliced and fried for protein-packed breakfasts. What made Scrapple truly remarkable was its incredible efficiency. Just one pig's head, and scraps could produce breakfast protein for a family of 8 for over a week. During the Depression, this ancient Amish technique of transforming waste into nourishment allowed families to maintain strength and health while spending almost nothing on protein. The simple practice of using everything and wasting nothing became a survival cornerstone that supported not just Amish communities, but neighboring families who adopted this frugal protein solution during America's hungriest years. Clabbered milk, the self-preserving dairy solution. While many Depression-era Americans lost access to dairy when they couldn't afford deliveries or feed for cows, Amish families relied on a forgotten preservation technique that modern Americans have completely abandoned: clabbered milk. This wasn't spoiled milk. It was a controlled fermentation that transformed fresh milk into a self-stable, digestible form that required no refrigeration. Unlike today's dangerous practice of leaving pasteurized milk unrefrigerated, Amish families worked with raw milk from their own cows. They would place fresh milk in clean crocks in a cool location, allowing natural beneficial bacteria to transform it into a yogurt-like food over 24 to 48 hours. The resulting clabbered milk had a pleasant tang and remained safely edible for days without refrigeration, a crucial advantage when ice was expensive and electricity non-existent. What made clabbered milk particularly valuable was its improved digestibility. The fermentation process pre-digested lactose and made proteins more bioavailable, allowing even those with milk sensitivities to benefit from dairy nutrition. During the Depression's hardest years, this simple technique allowed families to maximize the nutritional value from even small milk supplies while eliminating waste from spoilage. When fresh milk was a luxury many couldn't afford, this ancient preservation method meant Amish families maintained consistent access to calcium, protein, and probiotics that supported immune health through difficult times. Perpetual soup, the ever-ready meal solution. When food scarcity required maximum efficiency, Amish families maintained a cooking practice that modern kitchens have completely forgotten: perpetual soup. Unlike today's meal-specific cooking, this wasn't just food preparation. It was a strategic system that eliminated waste while ensuring hot nutrition was always available, regardless of work schedules or unexpected visitors. At the heart of many Amish kitchens sat a large cast-iron pot that rarely emptied completely. Families would keep this pot barely simmering on the back of wood stoves continuously, adding vegetable trimmings, bones, small meat scraps, and garden herbs. The slow, constant heat extracted maximum nutrition, while the acidity from occasional vegetable additions kept the broth safe for days of continuous use. What made Perpetual soup particularly valuable during hard times was its remarkable efficiency. Nothing edible was wasted. Even carrot tops, potato peels, and tough meat ends were transformed into nourishment. The always-ready nature meant that hungry children or tired workers could be fed immediately without additional fuel consumption or preparation time. During the Depression's leanest days, this practical Amish tradition allowed families to transform what others might consider scraps into sustaining meals that stretched minimal ingredients into maximum nutrition. Sauerkraut, the vitamin C insurance. When winter depleted vegetable supplies and scurvy threatened those without access to fresh produce, Amish families relied on a fermented food that modern Americans have largely relegated to hot dog topping, sauerkraut. This wasn't just a condiment, it was strategic winter nutrition that preserved crucial vitamins through months when gardens lay dormant. Unlike modern refrigerated food preservation, Amish families used simple bacterial fermentation to transform abundant fall cabbage into a storehouse of winter nutrition. They would shred cabbage, pack it with salt in stoneware crocks, and allow natural fermentation to create a tangy, vitamin-rich food that remained edible for months without refrigeration or canning. What made sauerkraut particularly valuable during the Depression was its remarkable vitamin C content at a time when citrus fruits were unaffordable luxuries. Just a few tablespoons daily provided enough vitamin C to prevent the scurvy that threatened many poorly nourished communities. The fermentation process also created beneficial probiotics that supported immune function during vulnerable winter months. When fresh vegetables disappeared from most Americans' diets during winter depression years, this simple Amish preservation technique maintained family health through simple ingredients and ancient wisdom rather than purchased supplements or expensive out-of-season produce. Dandelion harvesting, the backyard nutrition supply. When garden produce ran scarce during early spring, Amish families turned to a plant most Americans considered a lawn nuisance, dandelions. But this wasn't just folklore, it was strategic foraging that provided crucial nutrition exactly when winter food stores ran lowest, and spring plantings weren't yet productive. Unlike modern Americans who wage chemical warfare against these plants, Amish families welcomed the appearance of dandelions as the first fresh greens after winter. Children would be sent to gather young leaves before flowers appeared. When bitterness was minimal and nutrition maximal, these free greens would be transformed into salads, cooked as pot herbs with a bit of bacon, or added to soups and stews to extend meager supplies while adding crucial vitamins. What made dandelion harvesting particularly valuable during the Depression was its exceptional nutritional profile at zero cost. The leaves provided more vitamin A than carrots, significant amounts of vitamin C, and crucial iron when dietary deficiencies threatened health. The entire plant offered value. Flowers were transformed into jelly that tasted remarkably like honey when sweetener was available, while roots were dried and roasted to create a coffee substitute during times when real coffee was an unaffordable luxury. During America's hardest economic times, this simple Amish practice of recognizing food where others saw weeds helped countless families supplement restricted diets with nutrition growing freely around their homes. Potato water recycling, the invisible nutrition capture. When every nutrient mattered, Amish households practiced a simple kitchen technique that modern Americans have completely abandoned, saving potato water. This wasn't just frugality, it was a strategic nutritional practice that captured otherwise lost vitamins and minerals leached into cooking water. Unlike today's practice of draining vegetables directly into sinks, Amish families carefully caught the water used to boil potatoes, reserving it for multiple subsequent uses. This starchy liquid became the base for soups and gravies, was used to boil the next batch of vegetables mixed into bread dough for additional moisture and nutrients, or even used as a gentle starch rinse for laundering fine fabrics. What made potato water recycling particularly valuable during the Depression was its ability to capture the significant amounts of B vitamins, potassium, and other water-soluble nutrients that leach out during boiling. This simple practice effectively increased the nutrition derived from limited food without requiring any additional expenditure or resources. During America's hungriest years, this waste-capturing technique allowed Amish families to extract maximum value from every potato, a principle of total food utilization that helped maintain superior nutrition despite severely restricted supplies. If you're finding this journey through Amish Depression-era food wisdom valuable, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your membership helps us research and preserve more of this vanishing knowledge while developing future videos about forgotten self-sufficiency skills. The link to join is in the description below. Every member receives our exclusive Amish recipe collection featuring these time-tested preparation techniques. Meadow tea, the free summer beverage. When commercial beverages became unaffordable luxuries, Amish families quenched thirst with a wild-harvested drink that cost absolutely nothing. Meadow tea. Unlike purchased drinks, this wasn't a commercial product. It was forage nutrition that connected families to their landscape while providing refreshment during hot farm work. Families would send children to gather fragrant wild mint that grew abundantly in meadows and along stream banks during summer months. The fresh leaves were steeped in clean water, sometimes with a touch of honey or sugar when available, creating a refreshing drink that could be served hot or cold, depending on weather and preference. What made meadow tea particularly valuable during the Depression was its complete independence from store-bought supplies at a time when even basics like coffee and tea became inaccessible to many. The mint provided not just flavor, but valuable digestive support during times when restricted diets often led to gastrointestinal distress. During America's greatest economic challenge, this simple foraged beverage maintained both hydration and connection to natural cycles while requiring nothing beyond knowledge and access to uncultivated land where mint grew freely. Leather britches beans, the electricity-free bean storage. When winter threatened food security, Amish families preserved abundant summer green beans using a method that required no canning jars, no equipment, and no purchased supplies. Leather britches. This wasn't just food storage, it was a strategic preservation technique that maintained nutrition with nothing but air and string. Unlike modern preservation that demands canning equipment, Amish families would select the best late summer green beans, then thread them whole onto strong cotton string using a large needle. These bean strings were hung in dry, airy locations, often kitchen ceilings, covered porches, or attics, where they would slowly dehydrate into completely shelf-stable leather britches that could be rehydrated and cooked throughout winter. What made leather britches particularly valuable during the Depression was their complete independence from purchased preservation supplies. When canning jars, lids, and equipment became unavailable or unaffordable, this string-drying technique allowed families to preserve abundant garden harvests with absolutely no financial outlay. The resulting dried beans maintained much of their nutrition while developing a distinctive, rich flavor during the drying process. During America's hungriest years, this simple preservation technique allowed Amish families to maintain vegetable intake throughout winter using nothing but knowledge inherited from previous generations of self-sufficient ancestors. Venison mincemeat, the fruit-stretching preservative. When orchard harvests needed to last through winter, but sugar for preserving was scarce, Amish families relied on a multi-purpose preservation method most Americans have forgotten: venison mincemeat. Unlike modern sweet-only versions, this wasn't dessert filling. It was a strategic food preservation system that combined multiple ingredients to create storable nutrition. Families would combine ground venison from fall hunting with chopped apples, wild berries, small amounts of precious sugar or molasses, and plenty of warm spices like cinnamon and cloves. This mixture was packed into crocks and topped with rendered fat seals that prevented spoilage, creating ready-to-use meal fillings that remained edible for months without refrigeration. What made venison mincemeat particularly valuable during the Depression was its remarkable versatility. The preserved mixture could fill pies for special occasions, stuff squash for hearty farm dinners, spread on bread for quick lunches, or mix with grains for breakfast porridge. The combination of protein, fruit, and preservation spices created complete nutrition in a single mixture. During America's economic collapse, this practical storage method allowed families to preserve fall abundance using minimal sweetener, while creating convenient, ready-to-use meal components that required little additional preparation during busy winter workdays. Bread starter preservation, the perpetual leavening. When commercial yeast became unavailable or unaffordable, Amish bakers relied on a centuries-old technique most Americans have abandoned, Perpetual sourdough starter. Unlike commercial leavening that requires repeated purchasing, this wasn't a product. It was a living food partner that could be maintained indefinitely through simple care. Families maintained their sourdough starters in pottery crocks, feeding them regularly with small amounts of flour and water to keep the beneficial yeast and bacteria cultures active. A portion of this bubbly mixture was removed for each baking, with the remainder refreshed to maintain continuous leavening power. Many Amish families maintained starters passed down through multiple generations, creating breads with distinctive flavors tied to their family history. What made sourdough starters particularly valuable during the Depression was their complete independence from commercial supplies. When store-bought yeast became inaccessible due to financial hardship or supply disruptions, these living cultures continued providing reliable leavening for daily bread. The fermentation process also pre-digested grain proteins and made minerals more bioavailable, improving nutritional value during times of restricted diets. During America's hungriest years, this simple practice of maintaining living yeast cultures meant Amish families continued producing digestible, nutritious bread despite complete disconnection from commercial food systems. Smoked eggs, the spring abundance preserver. When spring brought overwhelming egg abundance but refrigeration didn't exist, Amish families used a forgotten preservation technique that modern Americans would hardly recognize: smoking eggs. Unlike today's focus on fresh-only eggs, this wasn't about short-term storage. It was about transforming seasonal gluts into long-term food security. When hens laid heavily in spring, families would hard-boil excess eggs, peel them carefully, and hang them in smokehouses where meat was being preserved. The gentle smoke penetrated the egg whites, creating a protective barrier against spoilage while imparting rich flavor. These smoked eggs were then packed in crocks between layers of clean straw or oats, creating portable protein that remained edible for months without refrigeration. What made smoked eggs particularly valuable during the Depression was their transformation into travel-ready protein at a time when work often required leaving home to find income. Men traveling for temporary labor could carry these preserved eggs as complete nutrition that required no preparation. The smoking process also enhanced preservation of the egg's natural vitamin D, crucial during winter months when sunlight exposure decreased. During America's greatest economic challenge, this simple preservation technique allowed Amish families to transform spring's temporary egg abundance into year-round protein security while requiring no purchased preservation supplies. Corn cob jelly, the zero-waste sweetener. When sugar became an unaffordable luxury, but sweetener remained necessary for food preservation, Amish families practiced a remarkable transformation that epitomized their waste-nothing approach: corn cob jelly. Unlike modern practices that discard cobs after kernels are removed, this wasn't garbage disposal. It was strategic extraction of untapped nutrition and sweetness. After removing corn kernels for other uses, families would simmer the clean cobs in water until the liquid turned pinkish red and developed a sweet flavor from residual corn sugars. This extract was then combined with minimal amounts of precious sugar or honey and cooked to jelly consistency, creating a spreadable sweetener that tasted surprisingly similar to apple jelly. What made corn cob jelly particularly valuable during the Depression was its ability to transform an otherwise discarded byproduct into valuable food with minimal additional ingredients. When purchased sugar was strictly rationed or completely unaffordable, this technique effectively multiplied the sweetening power of limited supplies by extracting natural corn sugars otherwise lost. The resulting preserve provided not just sweetness, but crucial, quick energy for hard-working farm families. During America's economic collapse, this waste-capturing technique demonstrated the Amish principle that often sustained communities through hardship, recognizing value and nutrition where others saw only trash. 3-day bean soup, the flavor-evolving meal. When cooking fuel was precious and protein needed maximum stretching, Amish cooks relied on a technique that modern convenience cooking has completely abandoned: 3-day bean soup. Unlike today's single meal preparations, this wasn't just cooking, it was strategic flavor and nutrition management that improved with time. Families would begin with a large pot of dried beans, ham bone or salt pork, and basic vegetables, cooking until everything melded into rich soup. Rather than consuming it all immediately, the soup was served for dinner, then returned to the coolest part of the wood stove or hearth overnight. The next day, more water and perhaps different vegetables or grains were added, creating an evolved version of the previous day's meal. By the third day, the soup had transformed again with final additions like foraged greens or herb dumplings. What made 3-day soup particularly valuable during the Depression was its remarkable fuel efficiency at a time when cooking heat often required precious resources like wood that demanded significant labor to produce. The practice allowed one initial cooking fire to effectively create 3 different meals through strategic additions and natural flavor development during controlled storage. The slow transformation also broke down bean starches for improved digestibility while extracting maximum nutrition from bones and vegetable scraps. During America's hungriest years, this simple cooking strategy allowed Amish families to create meal variety and maintain interest in restricted diets while minimizing fuel consumption, an efficiency that became crucial when every resource required careful management. Dried sweet corn, the winter vegetable insurance. When garden abundance needed to feed families through winter, but canning supplies were unavailable, Amish families preserved summer corn using a method that predated modern technology, ash treatment, and air drying. Unlike modern preservation, this wasn't just food storage, it was a transformation process that created an entirely different ingredient with concentrated flavor and nutrition. Families would harvest sweet corn at peak ripeness, then briefly cook the kernels in water with a small amount of wood ash, a practice that loosened hulls and enhanced preservation. The kernels were then thoroughly rinsed and spread on clean cloths to dry in the sun over several days, creating completely shelf-stable dried corn that would remain viable for years without any special storage requirements. What made dried sweet corn particularly valuable during the Depression was its incredible space efficiency compared to canned preservation. A bushel of fresh corn that might fill 30 to 40 canning jars could be dried and stored in a single cloth bag, requiring no purchased supplies and minimal storage space. When rehydrated in winter soups and stews, the dried corn provided extraordinary sweet flavor and concentrated nutrition that brightened otherwise monotonous cold weather meals. During America's greatest economic challenge, this ancient preservation technique allowed Amish families to maintain vegetable diversity through winter, using nothing but sunlight and traditional knowledge passed through generations. Apple Schnitz, the multi-year fruit preservation. When fruit harvests needed to last multiple seasons but sugar for preserving was scarce, Amish families turned to an incredibly simple yet effective technique, making Schnitz. Unlike sugar-heavy preserves, this wasn't just food storage, it was strategic transformation that maintained fruit nutrition for years without added ingredients. Families would peel and core fall apples, then cut them into thin slices that were strung on clean twine and hung to dry near cook stoves, in attic spaces or on covered porches. The slow air-drying process concentrated natural sugars while removing moisture that would otherwise lead to spoilage, creating leathery apple slices that remained edible for years without refrigeration or canning. What made Schnitz particularly valuable during the Depression was its complete independence from purchased preservation supplies or additional ingredients. When sugar was unaffordable and canning equipment unavailable, this simple drying technique allowed families to preserve entire orchard harvests using nothing but string and dry air. The resulting dried apple slices could be snacked on directly, rehydrated for pies and desserts, or added to winter stews for flavor and nutrition. Perhaps most impressively, properly dried Schnitz could remain viable for 2 to 3 years, allowing families to balance food security across variable harvest years. During America's economic collapse, this simple preservation technique created food security that spanned multiple growing seasons, crucial insurance against the consecutive crop failures that devastated many communities. Fermented croc pickles, the enzyme-rich preserves. When garden cucumbers produced abundance, but vinegar and canning supplies were scarce, Amish families relied on a preservation method that predated modern canning: lacto-fermented croc pickles. Unlike vinegar-based recipes, this wasn't just food in suspended animation. It was a living fermentation that created digestive enzymes while preserving summer vegetables. Families would layer fresh cucumbers in large stoneware crocks with dill, garlic, grape leaves, which contain natural tannins that maintain crispness, and salt brine. Without any vinegar, heating, or sealing, beneficial bacteria naturally present on the vegetables would transform the mixture into tangy, probiotic-rich pickles over several weeks of fermentation. What made fermented pickles particularly valuable during the Depression was their complete independence from purchased supplies beyond salt. When vinegar was expensive and canning equipment unavailable, this simple bacterial fermentation created preserved vegetables using minimal resources. The resulting pickles provided crucial probiotic bacteria that supported digestive and immune health during winter months when fresh foods were scarce. The fermentation process actually increased certain nutrients, particularly vitamin K2, making these pickles more nutritious than the original cucumbers. During America's greatest economic challenge, this ancient food preservation technique maintained vegetable intake throughout winter while supporting digestive health through simple ingredients and traditional wisdom rather than purchased supplements. Vinegar making, the self-perpetuating preservative. When commercial preservatives became unaffordable luxuries, Amish families produced their own universal food preserver, homemade vinegar. Unlike purchased products, this wasn't just an ingredient. It was a strategic capturing of natural processes that turned waste into essential preservation supplies. Families would save apple scraps, fruit peelings, and juice pressings in large crocks, adding a bit of sugar water or honey water to boost fermentation. With the addition of previous vinegar containing mother culture, the beneficial bacteria that create acetic acid, these scraps would transform first into alcohol and then into tangy vinegar over several months. The resulting liquid became a crucial preservative for pickled vegetables, a key ingredient in many recipes and even a household cleaning supply. What made homemade vinegar particularly valuable during the Depression was its ability to transform food waste into an essential preservation ingredient at a time when purchased vinegar became unaffordable for many. The mother culture could be perpetuated indefinitely, with each batch producing enough mother to start several new batches, creating truly sustainable preservation supplies. The resulting wild fermented vinegars contained beneficial enzymes and trace minerals not found in distilled commercial products. During America's economic collapse, this simple practice of capturing natural fermentation meant Amish families maintained essential food preservation capacity despite complete disconnection from commercial supply chains. Souse, the head-to-tail protein preservation. When economic hardship made protein scarce, Amish families practiced a nose-to-tail utilization technique that modern Americans have largely abandoned, making souse. Unlike today's selective meat consumption, this wasn't just unusual cuts. It was strategic transformation of typically discarded parts into shelf-stable, ready-to-eat protein. After butchering, families would carefully clean and process head meat, feet, and gelatinous parts that most people discarded. These were simmered until tender, picked from bones, and combined with broth naturally rich in gelatin. The mixture was seasoned with vinegar, salt, and spices, then poured into pans where it set into solid loaves that could be sliced cold for immediate protein with zero additional preparation. What made Souse particularly valuable during the Depression was its remarkable efficiency in utilizing parts that would otherwise be wasted. When protein was the most expensive and scarce food category, this technique effectively increased usable meat from each animal by 15 to 20% compared to standard butchering practices. The natural gelatin from joints and connective tissues created self-preserving texture while providing valuable joint-supporting nutrients often missing from restricted diets. The acidic vinegar component extended shelf life significantly without refrigeration. During America's hungriest years, this practical protein preservation technique allowed Amish families to maintain strength and health by recognizing value in parts that most Americans discarded, truly embodying the waste-nothing approach that became essential for survival during economic collapse. Chow Chow, the season-end garden preserver. When frost threatened remaining garden vegetables, Amish families practiced a strategic harvest preservation most Americans have forgotten, making Chow Chow. Unlike single vegetable preservation, this wasn't just food storage, it was a comprehensive system for capturing all remaining garden nutrition before winter claimed it. Families would harvest everything still edible as frost approached: tiny cabbages, green tomatoes, the last peppers, small onions, immature corn, and any other vegetables that wouldn't keep well fresh. These were chopped, combined with spices and vinegar, and transformed into a pickled relish that preserved the final garden produce for months without refrigeration. What made Chow Chow particularly valuable during the Depression was its ability to prevent waste during the critical garden-to-winter transition when many families lost significant potential nutrition to early frosts. The combination of multiple vegetables created more interesting flavor than single vegetable preserves, helping maintain dietary interest during monotonous winter meals. Perhaps most importantly, the practice captured significant nutrition at the end of growing season, extending garden benefits by months with minimal additional resources. During America's greatest economic challenge, this end-of-season preservation technique demonstrated the Amish principle that often meant the difference between hunger and security, capturing every possible bit of food value regardless of conventional harvesting norms. Maple water tapping, the late winter sweet sauce. When sugar supplies dwindled but sweetener remained necessary for food preparation, Amish families practiced an ancient American technique largely forgotten in modern time: collecting maple water. Unlike fall harvest activities, this wasn't just seasonal gathering, it was strategic utilization of natural early spring energy when winter food supplies reached their lowest levels. As winter began yielding to spring, but before gardens produced anything edible, families would tap maple trees by drilling small holes and inserting handmade spiles that directed the rising sweet sap into collection buckets. This slightly sweet liquid could be consumed immediately as a refreshing, mineral-rich drink or boiled down into syrup and sugar for preservation. What made maple water particularly valuable during the Depression was its perfect timing. The collection season arrived precisely when winter food supplies were most depleted and spring gardens weren't yet productive. The fresh, slightly sweet liquid provided a natural energy boost during the hungry gap between seasons. For families who lacked equipment to boil it down efficiently, Even the unprocessed sap provided valuable trace minerals and natural sugars that helped sustain energy during late winter work. During America's economic collapse, this ancient practice connected families to a natural sweetness cycle that arrived exactly when most needed. A perfect example of the seasonal awareness that helped Amish communities maintain better nutrition than many of their city-dwelling counterparts. Creamed dried beef, the shelf-stable dairy protein. When fresh meat was unavailable but protein remained essential, Amish families relied on a preparation method that modern Americans know only as a military joke: creamed chipped beef. Unlike today's processed versions, this wasn't just convenience food, it was a strategic combination of preserved ingredients that created complete protein from shelf-stable components. Families would preserve beef by salting and air-drying thin slices until completely shelf-stable, creating a protein source that remained viable for months without refrigeration. When needed, these intensely flavored dried beef slices were rinsed to remove excess salt, then simmered in milk-based white sauce, creating a protein-rich meal that combined dairy and meat nutrition from ingredients that required no refrigeration. What made creamed dried beef particularly valuable during the Depression was its ability to transform small amounts of preserved meat into filling family meals through strategic combination with more abundant ingredients like milk and flour. The rehydration process in savory sauce made small portions of intensely flavored dried beef satisfy larger appetites. The simple white sauce delivered crucial calcium and vitamin D when fresh dairy wasn't available. During America's hungriest years, this practical meal solution allowed Amish families to maintain protein intake through careful preservation and strategic combination with more accessible ingredients, creating satisfying meals from components many families could keep on hand without refrigeration. Pumpkin leather, the vitamin A preserver. When garden pumpkins needed preservation but canning supplies were limited, Amish families turned to an ingenious technique that required minimal equipment: pumpkin leather. Unlike today's canned pumpkin, this wasn't just basic preservation, it was strategic nutrition concentration that turned bulky gourds into compact, transportable vitamin sources. Families would cook and strain pumpkin flesh, spread the thick puree on cloths in thin layers, then allow it to dry completely in the sun or near cook stoves. The resulting leather-like sheets could be cut into pieces and stored in paper bags or boxes, requiring no special storage conditions while remaining viable for over a year. What made pumpkin leather particularly valuable during the Depression was its incredible space efficiency. A single pumpkin that might fill several canning jars could be dried into compact sheets that occupied minimal storage space while concentrating vitamins and minerals. The resulting product required no rehydration before use. Pieces could be snacked on directly or dissolved into hot water for instant soup base. The concentrated beta-carotene, vitamin A, content provided crucial immune and vision support during winter months when fresh vegetables became scarce. During America's greatest economic challenge, this simple preservation technique allowed Amish families to maintain vegetable nutrition throughout winter with minimal equipment, demonstrating their practical approach to food security through traditional methods independent of modern technology or purchased supplies. Pork cake, the shelf-stable celebration food. When holiday celebrations needed to continue despite economic hardship, Amish families prepared a remarkable baked good that modern Americans would barely recognize: pork cake. Unlike today's butter-based cakes, this wasn't just dessert, it was strategic utilization of rendered fat to create celebration food that remained edible for months without refrigeration. Families would use rendered pork fat instead of butter or shortening, combining it with molasses, dried fruits, and warm spices to create dense, rich cakes that improved with age. These heavily spiced creations were wrapped in cloth, then stored in cool places where they remained edible for months. Some families reported pork cakes staying good for up to a year when properly prepared and stored. What made pork cake particularly valuable during the Depression was its remarkable shelf stability during times when fresh baked goods were impractical and ingredients for treats were severely limited. The dense, moist texture created by pork fat prevented drying, while the high spice content naturally deterred spoilage. The result was a rare, sweet treat that could be prepared when ingredients were available, then saved for important celebrations regardless of when they occurred. During America's economic collapse, this practical preservation technique allowed Amish families to maintain important cultural traditions and celebration moments despite severe resource limitations, providing not just nutrition, but crucial psychological nourishment during extremely challenging times. Parched corn coffee, the foraged beverage alternative. When coffee became an unaffordable luxury, Amish families turned to a Native American-inspired alternative most modern Americans have forgotten entirely: parched corn coffee. Unlike commercial coffee, this wasn't purchased sustenance. It was a foraged alternative that provided warming comfort without dependence on distant supply chains. Families would select the hardest field corn, then slowly roast it in cast iron pans until the kernels turned deep brown and developed nutty coffee-like aromas. These parched kernels were ground in hand mills and brewed like coffee, creating a caffeine-free hot beverage that provided both warming comfort and a small amount of nutrition from the corn itself. What made parched corn coffee particularly valuable during the Depression was its complete independence from commercial supply chains at a time when imported goods like coffee became completely inaccessible to many families. The resulting beverage provided the psychological comfort of a hot morning drink even when true coffee was unavailable. Unlike many coffee substitutes that required purchased ingredients, this alternative could be produced from field corn grown on nearly any farm. During America's greatest economic challenge, this simple beverage alternative demonstrated the Amish approach to self-sufficiency, finding local solutions that maintained daily comforts despite disconnection from commercial markets. Bread and milk, the universal comfort food. In the desperate years of the Depression, Amish families maintained a simple meal solution that required minimal ingredients yet provided complete nutrition: bread and milk. Unlike today's complex convenience foods, this wasn't just simplistic eating, it was strategic combination of basic ingredients that created surprisingly complete nutrition from the most accessible components. At its most basic, families would break day-old bread into bowls and cover it with fresh or clabbered milk, creating an instantly ready meal that required no cooking. This foundation could be adapted endlessly, sweetened with molasses or maple for breakfast, seasoned with salt and pepper for a savory supper, or enhanced with fruit, nuts, or herbs when available. What made bread and milk particularly valuable during the Depression was its remarkable adaptability during times when cooking fuel might be scarce or workdays too long for elaborate meal preparation. When fresh bread and milk were available, this simple combination provided complete protein through complementary amino acids. The softened bread proved easily digestible for the very young and elderly during times when dental care was inaccessible. Perhaps most importantly, it represented the ultimate food security baseline. When almost nothing else remained, most Amish families could still produce at least bread and milk from their own resources, creating satisfying meals that sustained life through even the hardest times. The remarkable thing about this humble meal wasn't just its nutrition, it was how it preserved dignity during hardship. Unlike standing in bread lines or accepting government cheese, families could prepare bread and milk from their own resources, maintaining the self-sufficiency that formed the core of Amish identity. This psychological nourishment often proved as important as physical sustenance during America's greatest economic challenge, allowing families to maintain not just health but cultural cohesion through practices that connected them to generations of ancestors who had survived previous hardships through the same simple solutions. The smooth conclusion: these 25 Amish food practices aren't just historical curiosities, they're survival knowledge refined through generations. While modern food systems have disconnected us from these techniques, the Amish approach remains timeless: waste nothing, value what others discard, and maintain independence from commercial supply chains. During the Depression, these practices delivered complete nutrition through preservation, fermentation, and clever combinations of basic ingredients. Many Amish communities didn't just survive, they thrived by maintaining food traditions modern Americans had forgotten. Beyond physical nourishment, these methods built community resilience. Food preparation strengthened social bonds, creating networks that became the true safety net during America's darkest economic times. If you found this journey through Amish food wisdom valuable, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten survival knowledge. Which technique surprised you most? Share in the comments below. Until next time, when we'll explore more self-reliance lessons that modern America has forgotten but may need again.